All right. So today we're talking about, and this is just like an intro to prepare us for Sanjana's presentation. So we're talking about how Black people resisted during the Civil Rights Movement era. So, so just so the Black, for instance, especially the case of the Black America during the Civil Rights Movement era, they actually resisted systemic racism. And this period was basically in the 1940s and 1960s. Some have a timeline of it of between 19, there's this time frame I see between 1942 to 1968. And actually, even what they did had its roots earlier than this period. So although the major manifestations on major events and organizing around issues of civil rights were somewhat captured between the 1940s and 1960s. Some will say 1942 to 1968. So the movement actually spilled into Canada. Like we can see, it was eloquently articulated in the paper by Agnes Calist in 1995. And Sanjana will talk more about the the work of the paper by Agnes Calist in her presentation. So the Black resistance during the civil rights movement took many forms, not just the marches that we see. For instance, the picture here shows us the marches uh, with both blacks and non-black allies marching in advancing their causes. Uh, So there are also various actions which ranged with both the quiet daily activities or actions as well as the mass protests and legal battles. So just like we talked about in the previous classes, we learned about the everyday acts of resistance, or what we call the avoidance resistance, and then there were more obvious, overt breaking resistance as well as the constructive resistance. So all these components of resistance were, or types of resistance were expressed or utilized during this era. So several methods were adopted in the civil rights movement. Oh, they resisted. So we're gonna just touch on some of the ways that they resisted, that they adopted in their resistance, I mean. So one is a non-violent or direct resistance, and this was inspired by both Black church traditions and thinkers like Gandhi. And many activists use these non-violent approaches to expose injustices in the system. For instance, there were boycotts. We know, so I know some of you, or if not all of you, would be familiar with the Montgomery bus boycott of 1955 and 1956, where Black residents refused buses for over a year, and that's also seen as an economic form of resistance as well, because these campaigns demonstrated the economic power of the Black community to protest segregation. So you can imagine the the transporters or the companies that run these buses, when they are losing resources, losing money, so losing profits, so it affected their bottom line. And money, obviously, as we know, if when we refuse to spend it, it's a powerful tool or a powerful tactics of resistance, and it actually hits the segregation in the way that it hurts them. I've talked about in the previous class, if you can remember, how Dr. Martin Luther King died. He was eventually assassinated just in the period that he led protests with some workers. I think both those who are working in the waste, um, trying to those waste in the waste collection and some other poor and downtrodden people in the society. So it's actually powerful when you affect the economic um aspect of the society. So that is why this is significant. It raised awareness, but it also affected the resources of the corporate powers. So, and then there are also some of the economic slogans or that were used like, oh, don't buy where you can't work. So because we know about the access issues of access to employment opportunities and some other issues that they face, some of the challenges that they faced. So there were strikes by black workers, and then there were also some important um, slogans that were used in a bid to rally people around and to also make their voices known and their what they are trying to achieve known. There were also sit-ins, like the picture I have here also shows people preparing for sit-ins, trying to train people, especially students and non-others for sit-ins. So students actually sat in non-white, sorry, in white only lunch counters, so they weren't originally allowed to sit there, but yeah, in a bid to resist, we saw students trying to sit in those places and in a way that would at least be like, oh, we are not allowed here and we are not comfortable with this, we are not happy with this, and we want to protest this. And it's like a way to protest that segregation. And then we also know about the marches and the large crowd of protesters that marched across Syria. And then there were also the freedom rights where the integrated people actually rode buses into the segregated South. Even people from the northern parts of the US also joined the southern people in solidarity to have intercity rights uh, as a way to demonstrate and also make the voices of the blacks heard, no, their voices heard and their concerns and challenges also heard, also known. So these actions were not violent means of violence or violent means of a demonstration or resistance, but they were actually actions that constituted no violence, but were able to gain public attention and also pressure the government to act or to respond to the needs of Black people. So there was also the another important aspect, which is also the legal actions and voter registrations, where Black organizations fought segregation through the courts for several decades, and then organizations like we have I know Sanjana will also probably highlight it in her presentation, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, where that's the foremost Black civil rights organization that was founded in 1909, which included both Black and white activists who worked collaboratively and in solidarity to advance the causes of the segregated Black Americans. And even their influence, even in the Canada, we also see in the Agnes Callis paper, even in Canada, they were also involved, they had influence and established chapters in Canada. So there were also some seminal cases like an important cases like the Brown versus Board of Education case that achieved the desegregation of black in the school system. So there were also some other lawsuits that were meant to that actually helped in achieving um the resolution of voter suppressions, housing discrimination, and unequal pay of workers. Because initially, also was common that blacks, even when they did the same work with their white counterparts, the black people earned less. And that was part of the inequalities and inequities in the system. Then there were some important grassroots and institutional supports such as the Southern Christian Leadership Conference that was led by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who is a very popular figure that everyone knows. And they actually focused on church-based mobilization in Southern United States. It was actually originated their primary base and origination was actually um in in Atlanta, Georgia, and then they spread their tentacles and their influence across the country. Then there were also some other organizations like the Congress of Racial Equality that was founded by James Farmer and others. They pioneered this idea of sittings, let's say in schools or maybe in bars or in some other spaces where blacks are originally not allowed to sit in, to sit or to get to enter. And there were also these freedom rights were also part of their actions. Then there's also the important movement that was initiated by John Etienne. I'll get come to you very shortly. By John Robert Lewis. That's the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, which also led direct actions, nonviolent actions in the school system, and even spread across even the Canada in a bid to lead but mostly non-violent, although there were also some groups that has some violence, some student groups also that has some level of violence in their approach. But the Student Non-Violent Coordinating Committee adopted a mostly a non-violent approach. So SM, you can ask a question before. I just have a few more slides and I'm done, but you can ask a
Yeah,
question.
yeah, just a quick question. I was just
Yeah.
wondering, is Malcolm X not on this list because of like maybe the route of his, as far as his resistance, a little different than some of these individuals here?
Yeah, the good part is that voila,
Yeah,
Malcolm.
okay, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So Malcolm uh, is often categorized, is known for the violent ideologies and his views, which often tilts towards a violent approach, somewhat, not always completely violent anyway, but is categorized here under the cultural and intellectual resistance. This is basically the works of Black artists, writers, musicians, scholars, intellectuals, in terms of how they reshaped how America saw race through their literary works, speeches, music, and so on. Malcolm was a prolific speaker. He was very eloquent. He was well spoken. He was a very great speaker, public speaker. We know that. So he used his speeches, public speeches, both in public spaces and in smaller groups, where he used it to inspire people into action, trying to highlight the issues that affected the Black community. Even James Baldwin, we also know to be as someone that was Baldwin was a very great intellectual. With his writings and his public speeches, there's one popular debate between Baldwin and Berkeley. I don't know whether anyone here has watched it. Has anyone seen that debate? I think it was in the UK that they did that debate. Berkeley and Baldwin. Anyone? Has anyone come across that debate?
No,
No.
I haven't.
Oh yeah, you should. Just check it out. You see it by Berkeley and Baldwin. Yeah, it's something that would be great to watch. You would enjoy it. So, both of them are very great intellectuals. And Berkeley is a white man, and Baldwin, as we know, is a black man. So, and they are both intellectuals, and so I would recommend that you to just a good just you find it on you find it on YouTube for sure. Yeah, you find it on YouTube. It's, and you enjoy watching it. So there are also some other approaches that were used, such as the so I'll see comments. Okay, yeah, Jamal just okay, great. That was a great debate. Yeah. So some of them use freedom songs and gospel music, black newspapers and radio to publicize the issues affecting black people. And also culture helped build this cultural approach. It helped to build um pride, identity, and political consciousness, awareness in the black community. So their speeches, their music, their artworks, all their literally devices they used to propagate and promulgate the things affecting the black community. were very powerful tools that were very helpful during the Black resistance against segregation and oppression. That's the civil rights era in this case. Then there were also the violent one, although, however, but I was just wanted to highlight. That's why the first picture that is bigger here, you will see actually the activists they faced beatings, bombings, and arrests, but continue to protest. So well, we also know about the Selma to Montgomery March of 1965. Martin Luther King is very well known for some of these marches, both Birmingham to Selma and some other places. And then, however, not all resistance was non-violent. There were also some approaches. So, like I know, Etienne highlighted the Malcolm, thinking that he wasn't included because of some of his kind of violent rhetorics. Yeah, Malcolm himself was not. Yeah, he was not really known for much for violence per se by himself. You know about how the kind of early beginnings that he had, how Malcolm eventually was went into prison. In prison, he was converted to Islam. He became a disciple of Elijah Muhammad, and eventually he also learned the laws, read the laws, and then when he came out of prison, he began to use his voice, his skills, his gifts in public speaking. Yeah, he has some rhetorics that may imply some use of violence for sure, but maybe on his own, he may not have, have had that utilize the violence that much. But there are some other figures that actually advocated for the use of violence, not just advocated, but actually used, such as the Deacons for Defense and Justice that protected civil rights workers. They wielded guns, they wielded weapons, and tried to protect the workers, black workers. And then, however, the notion is that, or the idea is that the armed defense groups, they protected the activists from KKK, that's Ku Klux Klan, and police violence. So they felt that they wanted to offer physical and active protection to black workers or black people. And then there's also Robert F. Williams, which the single picture you see here. This is Robert F. Williams. So he advocated for self-defense, sorry, in North Carolina. So this is just to bring up and highlight some of the dimensions to this. They were the non-violence approaches, they were the Lego approaches, they were the mass mobilization, the grassroots mobilization approaches that led to marches and some other actions. And then there were also the violence wing. Even the Black Panther that Sanjana will talk about, they are also known to wield weapon for self-defense, and some of the members paid dearly with their life, like Fred Hampton and others. So then, just to wrap up, thousands were arrested even in non-violent protests, even in those supposed non-violent protests, as images of the confrontations inspired widespread public support for the movement's objectives. So, here we know about peaceful protests. Some of the protests eventually may turn violent, some may not turn violent, but the authority tried to suppress them by using violent means, as we all know. And then hundreds of thousands more participated in marches, even the boycotts, registration drives through the United States. you- They were able to mobilize much persons to get involved in these activities, hundreds of thousands, and if not more. The movement helped spawn a national crisis that forced intervention by the federal government to overturn segregation laws in southern states. As we all know, these things were more prominent in the southern part of the United States compared to the north. And they were able to restore voting rights for the African Americans. And they also ended legal discrimination in housing, education, and employment. That does not mean that some of this segregation and discrimination did not still continue, even to the present day, but it became at least illegal, and its impact and the way it was expressed was now more subtle than as overt as it used to be. So in closing, I just want to highlight or state that the civil rights movement restored universal suffrage in the southern United States and outlawed legal segregation. The movement's overall strategy combined litigation, like was pointed out. They also used mass media, boycotts, demonstrations, as well as sit-ins and other forms of civil disobedience to turn public support against institutionalized racism and to secure substantive reform. So I just want to just provide this background as we move further. But if anyone has any question, we can just touch on just a few minutes, then we'll go over to Sanjana's presentation. Does anyone have any question? Any question? All right, I'll stop the
I have a
recording.
question.
Okay, I'll
So
stop
in
the recording
terms
right
of,
now.
pardon?